The public hearing session is now closed, and it's time for the board to consider the item on the agenda.
Thank you for everyone being here. First of all, let me say thank you for the respect that you've shown all of us this evening. I know this could have been emotional, but I thought you all did a great job. If you look in the back, we're in the Patriot Cafe, if you look back there, and I thought each one of you displayed the appropriate attitude of a patriot, because each one of you had the opportunity to come and express your opinion to your elected officials and make your point. I think it was Phil who said that the office deserves the respect, and thank you for showing the respect here. I know it could have been worse, but thank you for your kindness tonight. So let me just briefly state my position, just for the record, because the cameras are here. And basically, the reason I voted to show the speech was simple. The office of the presidency deserves respect. And it does not matter who the man is or who the party is, the office deserves respect. And that was about the simplest and most direct way I made my analysis. And thank you very much. Because whether we agree with the president or not, the people elected him to that office. And when the people elect a man or woman to serve in that office, they deserve respect. Now, regarding the speech, I read the speech, and it seemed perfectly appropriate for K through 8, but just to test it out, I gave it to my 8th grader, and I asked her to read it, and she looked it over and said, yeah, it's okay. Yeah. No big reaction, so I was pretty convinced that the speech was appropriate for our K through 8. And then we had a meeting. Now let me just briefly, I guess I disagree with some of the folks on the special meeting, if I can just explain that. You call a special meeting, sometimes you have to call it when you have to make a decision in public. I asked for the special meeting because I was concerned that the decision would not be made in public. It's possible, I don't know what would have happened, but it's possible the decision all of you don't like could have been made behind the scenes. So having a special meeting was important, and we did have a number of people there. And I want to thank Leah, if she's still here, who came, and I want to thank Britt was also there. And at that meeting, there was, I think, 8 speakers, and they all spoke to allow the president to speak. So in terms of the purpose of the special meeting, it accomplished its mission. It put our board in front of the public with the opportunity to hear from the public, and the public spoke. Now, whether the board listens to the public is a different thing, but the public had the opportunity. So those of you who are critical of the special meeting, I think it actually accomplished its purpose, which was to make a decision in public. The tough situation I have now is that we made a mistake, and we have an apology that has been rendered by each of our board members. And knowing them individually, I believe that they are sincere in their apologies, or at least I haven't had let me say, regarding Mr. Duff, who I talked to extensively, and Ms. Hallgren, who I've talked to extensively, I do believe they're sincere. I just haven't had a chance to have an extensive conversation with Rick about this. But the question is, when somebody apologizes to you, how do you handle it? Well, I would suggest that we accept the apology and move on and get back to educating our students. Now, you may say, well, I'll accept their apology, but I don't trust them. Well, there's an election in November of 2010 for 3 of us, and in November of 2012 for the remainder of us. And that's where we have our opportunity to exercise our democratic privilege. So it's a difficult situation on how to handle the apology of my fellow board members, but I believe I'm willing to accept it, and I'm willing to move on and see if we can get back to educating our children. Each of you has to make that own decision in your heart, whether you want to accept it or not. And if you don't, that's fine, that's your privilege. And you have the opportunity to exercise your democratic vote in the next election. And you should all be proud of yourself, because you proved that the public has input. because after the board meeting on September 7th, and the decision was, I believe, wrong, because of all of your input, we have this meeting tonight, and we have apologies, and we have a good view of how we're going to change it. So you deserve a round of applause for doing your job too. So thank you very much for being here, and it's a difficult situation, but I would just like to make a motion, if it's appropriate, to accept the apology of the board for their decision. I don't know, what else I can do other than to accept the apology. So that's my motion.
Is there?
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
You should abstain.
Discussion.
You can't accept your own apology.
In terms of discussion, I'd like to make one thing perfectly clear. The two board members are going through this whole session of sitting, listening to the rest of the other three board members being torn apart, and rightly so. I'm bothered by the fact that they're voting to accept an apology for which they had no guilt. That has some difficulty with me. They didn't have any part in the guilt, and I did. So if you accept my apology, that's one thing. Accepting an apology from them wouldn't be fair. I'm not sure how to handle that, though.
It's my understanding that, and Bill, you can clarify this, but it's my understanding that the motion is to accept the apology from three board members.
Correct.
And that would I agree with you, Mr. Duff, and concur that Mr. Baber and Ms. Turner, Dr. Turner, do not owe the community an apology, and I would appreciate that the motion be clear that it's just the three individual board members that are apologizing.
That is correct. And if I could just add one more thing. I was so impressed by Sophia, if she's still there. Maybe I'll get to vote for you for president someday. And is Paulo still here? That was one of the most impressive speeches I've ever seen an elementary child give. So both of them deserve a round of applause because I'm proud of being And thank you for every one of our teachers who came. And we really appreciate those of you who work in our district and work for our kids every day. And you have enough to do for the district, and you're here at night too. So we appreciate you, and we also appreciate the teachers who came from every other district. So.
Okay. First of all, thanks to all of you for coming out and voicing your views. It's really nice to see democracy work here. Whether we agree or disagree, I just like to see the people who we're representing come out and voice their views. This was nice. On September 7th, if those of you who were there and those of you who read the comments after, you know my position on the 7th. It has not changed. We should have aired that speech for the kids. As far as this motion is concerned, I just want to make it clear, and I think it's already been pretty clear by President Hogren and Member Duff, that I am not going to apologize for what the other three members, how they voted. Because if you read that meeting, or you read the papers after, you would have known my position and how I stated it over and over and over again. So I can't apologize for that. However, since they made an apology, and I've talked to President Hogren about it, she called me and wanted to apologize, and I really appreciate that. I didn't solicit anything from her. She called on her own. I've talked to her, so I believe her apology is sincere, and I will accept her apology. I haven't talked to the other two board members who made that.
No email?
So if they want to apologize for making a wrong decision, I will certainly accept that apology. But I think that apology goes to, foremost, the children of our district.
Then perhaps if the seconder will agree, the motion should be that the board accepts the apologies, plural, of members Duff, Winnett, and Haldren on behalf of the entire district and the students of our district.
And the superintendent.
I don't think it's right for Rick to accept his own apology. He can't.
Well, hold on, this is our part of it.
I'm sorry, but this is not public interaction. I appreciate your, the meeting as
No,
I
you
stated-
can't have Rick accept his own apology. That's a point of order.
Wait a second here.
I'm sorry, I'm going to speak out.
No.
This is wrong.
No,
At
this
this-
is the public meeting, the way it's set up. At this point, it's time for the board to discuss among ourselves what the action is going to be.
If you're out of line, we're going to tell you.
Okay.
We're going to be talking to you if you're out of line.
Sir, I have the
doesn't get
floor.
to-
If there's an issue, perhaps we can talk about this later, but I have the floor to make the motion, and the motion is to accept their apology on behalf of the district and the students of our district.
I would also like to include the superintendent and the staff, because I really.
That's my motion, I'm not changing it if you don't want.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion?
Who was the seconder?
Mr. Williams?
I don't believe that's in order. He must abstain.
Sir, at this point, you've gone beyond the bounds of your position here, and someone who's on the board can second a motion.
Okay, and I am going to defer to Mr. Baber on that, because he is an expert on Robert's Rules of Order. So if there's no other discussion, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. And once again, I just want to say how sorry I am, and I just wish this had never happened.
What form is the apology going to take?
At this point, I will call for a 5-minute recess so that people can kind of regroup. I think probably board members need to take a 5-minute recess. So we'll come back in 5 minutes and continue with the agenda. Thank you.
How can you accept your own apology?
Oh, you were so good. Yeah. So what do you want to do? I want to be a marine biologist. All right. I love that.
Thank you for indulging me in the recess. It was much needed. Item number 2 is Resolution 091011. That's to school officials.
President Hogan, I asked for this agenda item as well. I'd like to pass out a statement and a motion.
Okay.
The statement is dated tonight, September 15, 2010. In the course of public debate, emotions can run high on some issues. The board members who voted in the majority on September 7th can attest to this fact. Many of those with an opposing view have lowered themselves to name-calling, ugly, and uncivil language. While this behavior is demeaning and irresponsible at best, I have an example to share with you this evening that crosses the line. This is an email that was authored by Paul Schnellbelt, president of the Mesa Spring Valley Teachers Association. On September 8th, Mr. Schnellbelt was addressing members of the Teachers Association when he wrote the following, quote, "Some people asked what they could do to the 3 school board members who voted in favor of this. Are the 3 school board members up for election in November? We were unsuccessful removing a board member last time simply because people would not come to the phone banks. If you are going to challenge the king, you'd better kill the king." Unquote. I believe that we must discourage this type of language when someone refers to killing a school board member. These words, taken figuratively or literally, have no place in our education or school setting. This is why I have brought this item to the board this evening. I move that we approve Resolution 09-1011, threats to school officials.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion?
I frankly believe metaphorically speaking.
Can you use a microphone, sir?
Yeah.
I frankly feel that was metaphorically speaking, and it wasn't meant to be directed toward the actual meaning of killing, but rather that there's a change that could be made by whatever means that they need in terms of how they discuss the issues. I have a favoritism towards the motion, on the other hand, because there's a certain amount of protection that a civil servant in our respect could be given. We do sometimes make statements that are inflammatory, and when other people take a step against that, that could cause some difficulty in our own lifestyle. And I've had some means of remarks that are rather defaming, inflammatory, directed at me as a result of this, that have no truth to them whatsoever.
While I certainly support the notion that no school board member or elected official should be subject to physical harm because of a decision they made in their office. In fact, I don't believe anyone should be subject to violence for words. I don't believe in violence. It's a bad way to go. I believe in negotiation and working out our differences. I certainly believe that. But I can't support this resolution because I do believe that citizens have a right to criticize their political people they voted into office when they feel they've done something wrong. So I believe that this resolution has language in it that talks about personal attacks. Verbal personal attacks, I have no problem with it. If you're a political, if I had a problem with it, it wouldn't make any difference because I'm a political figure and what I do, I'm being looked at and judged by the public and you get to comment on that. And that's fine. And I knew that when I ran for this office. But physical attack, threats and attacks, I do not believe in that and I do condone that. And as far as what was just read into the record here, the language about killing, I agree with Member Duff. This was not, I think, taken in context with the whole message here. Literally killing, but figuratively speaking about removing somebody from office.
Mr. Bader, did you want to comment?
The resolution, Mr. Duff? Okay. The resolution is titled Threats to School Officials. Whereas all school officials, as part of their duties, made decisions that at times may be unpopular. Whereas all people are entitled to a safe and healthy community. Whereas in today's society, individuals may respond to unpopular decisions with threats and personal attacks. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education of the La Mesa Spring Valley School District hereby states that all legal means will be used to protect the safety and well-being of the board and all school district employees. It is further resolved that the board condemns personal attacks and threats to any individual. And then the rest is just the standard counter votes after that. With all due respect, Mr. Duff and Member Turner, our interpretation of what that email meant is getting to gray area. Mr. Superintendent, if you had a situation at a middle school where one student used that word and perhaps it was metaphorically, how would you have handled it?
Metaphorically, in a middle school situation, the student would have been called into my office, sat down, we would have discussed the word that was used, most likely called home, have the parent come and visit us, and potentially send the child home for a day or so, depending on what was the intent and the circumstance surrounding that. Certainly we would want the youngster to understand that to use the word kill with it brings a great deal of responsibility. One of the examples you might use in that situation is the line at the airport as you're walking through, and you don't even joke about certain activities in the airport line, and in society today we don't really joke about hurting each other. And so very likely that youngster would have gone home for a day or more, depending on the circumstance.
The line, it is further resolved that the board condemns personal attacks. The problem with that is, certainly, I think we would have unanimity in saying condemns personal physical attacks. The question is, when is a personal attack and a personal criticism and a I disagree with you? How do you, those are very difficult to define. That's the problem with that, those two words.
I would concur with that. You know, there's a, how do you define a personal attack? And I would say that would be construed to be a physical personal attack, not necessarily a verbal personal attack.
Well, certainly the board could adjust the wording of the resolution. If it so chose, we would have to have a motion then to accept the changing of the wording. I would offer that the line that talks about personal attacks doesn't talk about a difference of opinion or a dialogue regarding anyone's positions. I think where that line gets crossed is when my difference and your difference becomes personal and I start name calling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And remember, this line is against all individuals. We do punish youngsters for calling each other names in our elementary schools. We do not allow youngsters to personally threaten or attack each other. In fact, we discourage that behavior and have a great deal of work with our Peace Builder program to praise people and give up put downs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly the board can adjust the language here, but I believe as a school district, we do condemn personal attack on any individual.
I don't have anything to say. If the maker of the motion, are you all saying that the maker of the motion?
Call for the question?
I don't know if other members have anything else to say.
I'd like to speak on the issue. The public would like to speak. I put my card in.
This is highly unusual because at the beginning of the hearing, at the beginning of the meeting, we had...
my card's in. I'd like to speak, please.
I was just explaining that we had, at the beginning of the meeting, there was an opportunity for the public to talk about agenda items. It was, I thought it was clear that we had public hearing related to item 1 directly with our agenda item.
This is an agenda item. I want to speak to this one now.
President Holligan, with your indulgence, if our guest can promise to keep to 3 minutes, which he's supposed to, I don't have any problem with it.
I object to that. Bill, Member Weber, you know that this is not appropriate. The president knows
you
this.
know, this is
not
the
appropriate.
Okay, this is the situation
actually,
we're in. This is, it is not, it is it is not appropriate or ordinary for our meeting. However, this is a very highly charged issue, and I would not like to be accused of censoring anybody. So I'll look to other board members, Mr. What?
Well, generally, any item that's on a docket, the public has a right to speak to. The question is, where in the agenda does it fall? Under our normal practices, we have them clustered at the beginning, usually for the benefit of the public, so they can speak and lead. I think it complies with the spirit of the Brown Act to allow a 3-minute speech. Anything beyond that would not comply with the spirit on this subject. So I'm okay.
You would be then okay to stop our meeting at any time to allow a public member
no,
to
I really think
comment.
The judgment call you have is when somebody wants to speak and doesn't get their card in on time. And, you know, do you hold them to the deadline, or do you try and fulfill the spirit that people have a right to speak?
This speaker has already spoken.
Not on this item, and each item has its own class of speak. You can speak to, if there are 5 items on it, you could put in a slip for five different items.
And although this is highly unusual, I agree with Mr. Baber, and I respect your opinion, having had much experience with the city of San Diego. And I will allow you 3 minutes. And if you would go ahead and restate your name and your relationship with the district.
Yes, my name is Ray Lutz. I'm with citizensoversight.org. It is common practice among bodies to allow the public to speak to items if you haven't completed a discussion on them. In fact, Riverside Board of Supervisors asked the audience, does anyone else want to speak on this item before we close it? So it's not uncommon at all. Now, for this is very unusual. We just heard an apology come forward. These people who are apologizing are now saying, we're really not apologizing. And we want to drag this thing through. In fact, our opponents in the matter, we want to make them feel very bad about this.
Now remember, under the rule...
Excuse me, sir. I'm speaking.
Let me say, under the rule, I defended your right to speak. You have to speak to that issue. So I'm assuming you're going to get the point on this resolution. Going back to the prior one would not be appropriate.
Excuse me. I'm speaking about this. The motion on the floor right now that you have has to do with saying that someone made a threat which was based on the other discussion item. The only reason that threat was made was because this group did something out of the ordinary that has been apologized for. It never would have come up had you guys not done that. So I think it's completely absurd now for you to be saying that now we're not apologizing after all for what we did wrong, and the people that were discussing it are actually very wrong for saying that we are wrong. This should be canned. You guys are out of line here by saying, and the people that were saying that you want to apologize, you better vote against this, because you're not apologizing otherwise.
All right, the question has been called for. The motion stands as is, and the resolution stands as is. So all those in favor of the resolution as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. And I would just like to state after the fact that the reason of my opposition is because I agree with Member Turner. It was very difficult for me to listen to people call me names and say very truthfully hateful things, but I believe I am a public official and I will stand up and take it. I don't agree that people should personally attack members of an elected board, so I don't condone that. But I think that in this particular case, because the wording is unclear as to specifying it to a personal attack, that I'm voting against the motion, or against the resolution as stands. With all of that said, oh, actually, we do have, it was a roll call vote.
Please.
So,
it's a roll call
sorry
vote.
about that. Okay. I'll do that one too. Mr. Baker.
Aye.
Mr. Duff.
Aye.
No.
Nay.
Aye.
So the motion carries 3-2. Next item on the agenda is reports of officers of the board, 2008-2009 unaudited actuals financial report.
Well, Mr. David Yoshihara is here to present the 2008-2009 unaudited actuals. We do have the PowerPoint in the back of the room for the